very, very much conversations. I'm pleased to welcome to the program Jerry Spivack. And Jerry Spivack is he's president of an organization called Interaction. But maybe you could share a little of your own background, if you could. Please.
Sure, be a pleasure. I would say that originally I came out of Brooklyn, New York, and lived a life of quiet boredom for a substantial period of time. Went through the public school system, which I found not tremendously exciting. And then suddenly, in the middle of all of that, I found myself coming into the opportunity to go over to Bell Laboratories, which was at that time considered the premier research institution in the United States. And interestingly enough, I really knew very little about it. I had spoken with someone and was just offered the opportunity to come in. I probably had some of the requisite background, but I hadn't been involved with that type of thing.
You had done some academic work and so forth? Or?
Well, I had taught math at Brooklyn College at that time. I had taught junior high school in a junior high, which was written about. It was written about in a special book called The Shame of Our Schools. A reporter from the Journal American had come in there without mentioning he was a journalist, had come in as a substitute teacher, and had spent his time there writing. And when he finished, he wrote this book about
Jacob Holt, was it?
I'm not sure of the name, but he was not sure, but he was a leader, or rather it was a leading expose about what was soon to become what were the general conditions of many of the schools of New York City. So it began to just show the transformations that were beginning to take place.
And I know that's something you're interested in, education. I know that. Yeah.
Well, that's certainly one of my big interests.
But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. But
no, that's fine.
Yeah.
But the thing that struck me at the laboratories was that this was an extraordinarily free environment. An environment in which one could meet people who thought about many different areas, who had a background that was rather extensive, and each of those people willing to share tremendously whatever it was they were interested in. So it was a kind of a playpen of ideas, of thoughts, of the ability to create, and at the same time it allowed for, because of the funding, almost an unlimited sense of the possibility for discovery.
Gee, that must have been really exciting and fun, as you say, and incredibly interesting. What year again did you go there?
Well, I was there originally in 1962.
Right. Gee, what an exciting time to be there, and trying to get the measure of some of the implications of
communications, technology, etc. Yes. Right. But what for me was so exciting was just that the transformation from what were the ordinary parameters that most people lived in society, in relation to society, and the other piece in which what we were dealing with was the whole sense that one could move into all sorts of additional directions, that weren't there before.
Yeah, and that was in 1962
for a number of years, till about 67 or so.
And were you particularly interested? You're at Bell Labs. They're always interested, I know, in communications, obviously.
Yes.
And they're interested in the implications of technology to the human condition. And weren't you part of a group called Future Scan or something? You were trying to get a sense of future orientation of some of these. Were they concerned with these things?
That was actually a later part of my travels. I came back to Bell Labs at a later time, and then spent time also at AT&T. So it was then I got more involved with the future directions. But that was not the initial time. The initial time was, in fact, really creating the future, I would say, in terms of the things we were spending our time doing.
Yeah. And you were there that wasn't a particular. It seems to me in a particularly exciting time, a positive. Kennedy. I mean, it was a time when there was a great deal of idealism that was beginning to manifest among a great number of the people. Country was being convulsed by a lot of social political changes and so forth. They began to launch that war on poverty. But there was a concern, and one of your concerns has been the implications of technology, the computer and communications, and the emerging information environment that is so coming around us all the time now. So that must have been one of the leading places for the thinkers of the world, the people who understood that human technology interface to find expression there at the Bell Labs. It was like an exciting university and educational experience, I would have thought.
Well, it was certainly that, among other things. But one of the things that I did want to specify was that at one time I had a friend come over and showed her the facility, and she was a nurse, and she used a rather interesting comment, which was tied to that particular situation. And what was going on was that she said that the atmosphere struck her as somewhat sterile.
She felt it was. Right?
Well, now, this was a nurse, and what she felt was that it was an ivory tower kind of environment, and that hit me tremendously at that point.
Yeah.
What I realized was that I was extremely fortunate to be in that situation, and that most of the world did not have that as their kind of environment.
Right. Well, isn't there something to be said for the fact that people who are concerned with things can be? It's like the Federal Reserve Board is a little bit, a little bit apart from the hurly-burly of everyday, concerns, and to be a little bit removed from the reality, the everyday reality. There's something to be said for that sort of detachment or ability to suspend judgment on everyday decisions in a certain sense. I don't know. I mean, you understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying.
But at the same time.
Yeah, my sense is that many of the people who were there, of course, had come up from all sorts of environments. Some of them might have come from poorer, neighborhoods. Some might have come from other types of situations. So it wasn't that they were totally detached people, and they certainly took an interest in what was going on in terms of poverty, in terms of a lot of other things. As a matter of fact, we had, on a regular basis, in the auditorium, people from South America would show films of the poverty that existed within their countries. We had, in addition, films of showing some of the poverty that existed in the ghetto areas. So there was and people coming and talking about those things. So there was this tremendous sense of social concern and the sense that, my God, how could we not, since we were somehow favored or fortunate in where we were, not be participating on some level in trying to get things to move in a positive and better direction socially?
Right.
But what was coming into my particular sphere of concern was that so many children did not have that opportunity, did not have that experience of walking into that stimulating an environment, because, as I said, for me, at an earlier time, I hadn't found that kind of stimulation. School hadn't been of that nature of stimulation.
Right.
And so I felt that this was the type of thing that I would like available for people more generically.
Yes, that's right. I see. And that's your interest in education. That was also Mr. Harrington had just written that book on The Other America and the poverty. And Mr. Johnson, our president, was launching the war on poverty and Head Start and some of these other things were getting started. But again, back to the fact that you were particularly interested in the educational potential and enriched educational potentiality that perhaps some of the technologies were making available to greater numbers.
Well, I was certainly hoping that some of this technological transformation might be able to find its way. And more recently, I've been thinking about this, and some time ago I gave a little talk. And this talk revolved around what a computer was.
Yeah.
And when the first computer had arrived. And I opened it up by just opening it up to the audience and saying, when had the first computer come? And then some of them said that there was the ENIAC, which existed around the time of the Second World War, and others mentioned Babbage, who was a gentleman of the time, the 19th century, who had worked on putting together gears and trying to put together, at least conceptually, what a computer might be. But my answer was that it was when human beings had first come on the face of the earth, because a human being is, in point of fact, the brain. They're an input-output device. They have inputs coming in. They have the ability to begin to think. There is some kind of logic going on. So there's a CPU, a central processing unit, and all of those aspects. So that was something I was thinking about, and the fact that expert systems were moving into the brain and so on. But that was a while ago. I mean, that talk I must have given maybe 20, 15 years ago.
Oh, wow. Okay,
But what has come to me more as intriguing at this point is the major transformation that's taking place now, because in those days, we were looking at the computer as a standalone kind of situation.
Yes.
And of course, the human being sometimes is too often in a standalone situation. And what's taking place right now, I believe, is that we're moving into something that resembles much more a brand new organism.
Interesting.
A global organism of some type.
Yes, all right. Yes.
And what's taking place is that the kind of knowledge base is no longer that of a single individual. In the same way that one can think of the printing press, and of course people have made this analogy, as having allowed for the perpetuation of knowledge, of a kind of universal knowledge for everyone.
And dissemination.
And dissemination, of course. Yeah. At this time, the capabilities of something like the Internet, of these memory modules, and so on, are allowing for the storage of all of human knowledge, of all of present human communication, of all of those aspects to be maintained in that kind of special manner, which we did not have in the past. And there are experiments going on now, which we can talk about, which have to do with education, which are beginning at even the upper higher education levels. There is a virtual college being experimented on and explored at this very moment at New York University. And that particular piece that's being looked at over there under the auspices of a gentleman named Dick Vigilante involves putting together courses utilizing dispersed computers, students that are dispersed, and so on. One can begin to realize that in the next century, that one can begin to have all of that type of information, the teachings of great teachers, the communications of the various students, and some of them may in fact have their own thought processes that can be explored, will all be stored, and people will be able to go back and look at them. And these will all be, in fact, easy to reach because of this technique that a lot of the people are utilizing, which is a linkage technique, which some people have called hypertext, some people have called hypermedia, and so on. And so what we're getting is this kind of global organism that I'd like to think of, and that's one particular domain that's opening up.
That's a very interesting analogy. I mean, Robert J. Lifton asks us to think in species-wide terms, and we have this principle of the Gaia, you know, that begins to emerge and so forth. But that's very interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when you talk about the Gaia, one of the things that I sort of think about is that when Lovelock, I guess it was,
Lovelock, like
who talked about that kind of Earth organism.
Yes. Or what Rupert Sheldrake also.
Sheldrake.
Interesting, he begins to posit a sort of organic model for the universe, which is very interesting. With morphic resonancy, that's an interesting kind of things that are emerging. But anyway, yeah.
I agree. And not only is it emerging, but see, I think what we're doing is we are sort of continuously moving up a hierarchy, moving up from, again, the beginning of life, which is also, of course, some form of, at this point, computers. And the only reason we use computers at this point is that it's easiest to analogize with the newest form of technology. I mean, at one time it was the Industrial Revolution, so we thought of humans vis-a-vis machines. At another time it's the computer, so we think of humans vis-a-vis that, and so on. And each time we move into different kinds of analogical views of these particular domains. But the what's interesting in terms of what you're speaking about is the kind of new physics view, where a lot of the physicists are asking the question in the books that are coming out, exactly what is the purpose of having humans and reason on the planet at this particular time?
Right.
And what they seem to be indicating is that we are here for only one well, not for only one purpose, but one of the purposes that we are here for is for the universe to become self-conscious.
That's interesting. The universe to become self-conscious. You know.
And so, yes.
But if I may, you know, Buckminster Fuller, comprehensivist too. You've been involved with Barbara Marx Hubbard and the Future Society and so forth. And Buckminster Fuller used to he was comprehensivist, and he used to look about, and he would try and say, is there is there any you know, how can we get some sense of a purpose for the biological evolutionary process or for the evolution of consciousness, as we see? And he used to see it as being that he used to posit, now I don't know, he used to posit an a priori mysterious design to the structure of universal mind. He would use that term. Sheldrake will use that. And that it's made up of a series of synergistic resonances of interaccommodated systems. And the systems analysis begins to let us see systems, and that the relationship between them is a resonancy, that there's a resonancy. Superstring theory seems to say that with the Planck length, the down now, and that it's a series of resonances that interaccommodate systems, and that the purpose of biological process is to move across entropy to bring increased patterns of conscious understanding of the process of which we are a part, and to run counter to the second law of thermodynamics, that all systems move toward chaos to the limits of the system and can bring order and understanding to the process of which we're a part. And that he posited, it seems to me, that we were at a moment of a new relationship to universe after 200,000 years of the humans, Homo sapiens sapien, a new relationship to universe than that which we've been throughout the human experience. I don't know whether or not that makes sense, that we're at a time of qualitative transformation in the evolution of universal consciousness.
Well, I believe we're definitely at a time of qualitative transformation. Exactly whether it's the evolution of human consciousness or whether we were in for some serious troubles, I'm not sure.
Well, he wrote an interesting book, Utopia or Oblivion,
right,
in a certain sense, that said that we may not. He used to popularize the term synergy. Synergy, he would go to speak to audiences, he'd say, how many people have heard of synergy? And a couple of hands would go up, and now everybody knows it. It's the behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of its parts. There's some resonancy more than the sum of an interaccommodated system. There's something there. So he wasn't positing an absolute system. He was positing the relationship of systems within a nested hierarchy of systems of understanding. And so that our relationship to the universe might be one, if we get to a liberated condition or some sort of a liberated condition, it would be a resonancy that will interaccommodate us to universe. But that's getting almost into ideas of consciousness and quasi-spiritual and other kinds of things that mankind's tried to deal with. But it's interesting that you would say that maybe the technological rendezvous, is that it makes this a particularly exciting time in terms of the longer haul sweep of human experience. Yeah, all these trends are going exponential at this particular time, almost like a birth, just end of a gestation period. Or
and definitely I'm thinking of the technology merely as tools to some type of an end. As a matter of fact, someone has written a book recently called Meta Man. And the book really just says that we have to stop thinking of human civilization as merely what happens between people, because we have added a collection of infrastructures at this point in time. Yeah. We've got the subways, we've got the irrigation systems, we've got telephones, we have this computer system obviously beginning,
and the electromagnetic spectrum.
Right, and all of that.
Yeah.
So, but the aspect that I'm talking about in terms of whether we're going to move it positively or negatively, some work was done some period of time ago by a gentleman named Poole, I guess, out at Ithaca de Sola Poole at Harvard and MIT. And what he was kept looking at was what happens as you bring new kinds of structures into civilization. What are the positive and negative arenas that arise from that? And one can take very simple examples. I mean, not simple, but certainly noticeable. The building of the highways, the putting together of cars, which has allowed people to move easily from one place to another up to a certain point. However, as soon as you have enough people with cars, as soon as you start expanding those highways, then all of a sudden the cities become relatively impassable, and all of a sudden you are beginning to move on a decline as opposed to a positive move upward in terms of people's ability to move from one place to another. So, exactly what's going to happen with this new communication capability. We don't know whether they will help goods and services to move more easily from place to place or any of those other aspects. And so the positive and negatives of this are a little bit difficult to judge at this moment.
Yeah, but you've been looking at these things since well, actually all of your life in a certain sense, because you've been intellectually interested in these things. You had this involvement with AT&T, where you took the measure of many of these technological developments. You've also been very involved with education, the question of education, both our formal institutions and so on. And you've been involved with the Mensa program for gifted children, right? Maybe could you talk a little bit about the hat you wear as an educator and some of the potentialities for education that you might see emerging?
Well, for a while I was a coordinator of gifted education for Mensa within the New York, Westchester, and area. But what I'd like to say about that was it was something I did on a voluntary basis, something I was interested in, but the way that I got along especially well with the Board of Ed and something I believed was that all children are gifted.
Yeah, all right.
I certainly had no belief that the IQ is what determines one's gifts or anything of that nature.
Right.
As a matter of fact, there's a rather well-respected researcher at Harvard named Gardner who talks about the 7 levels of IQ and mentions that things like mathematical and the ability to move and other things are all forms of IQ, and that each one of them are forms of gifts that one can use and have them possibly interrelate with one another. So for me, the real trick is, how does one get people's gifts to appear? And
in terms of their own inner given potentiality.
Yeah, and I think people have many inner given potentialities,
right,
but
exactly,
just as a very, again, a simple example, during the agricultural period, in order for a person to be very talented, to be truly great, what was necessary was for them to be able to till their land or be able to just have the crops come up. Right. And many people had that gift. The difficulty is when all of a sudden one begins to rip apart and take away from that particular domain the ability to have that kind of movement and ability to have these kinds of switches take place where a person's gifts is matched with what's being called for by that society. At this point in time, very little is being called for by our society.
Of the gifts that the people do have.
There isn't a good match between the gifts people have and what's being asked of them.
Really?
So that what takes place is that a lot of people are walking the streets and no one is asking them to do anything, although they may have lots of gifts that would be able to be pulled out if only there was anyone at this point asking them in a meaningful fashion to deliver on some level of those gifts.
Why, in our collective wisdom, have we not been able to establish a society that allows us to call forth the best that each person has, in your view?
Well, now, I honestly, at this point, believe that the important thing is for us to pour out much more of the riches of our society, to be putting out some of the, I've had an interest for some time in the possibility of developing a series of clubs.
Yes.
I think of it as a club ed. And what this would consist of, is really something attached to the school system that would especially allow for people after school to pursue the interests that they truly have.
That they have themselves.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, they would have to enlist for the various clubs within this structure, so that a particular example of that would be, there would be a baseball club. And people would communicate about trying to guess which was the correct average of the pitcher better than somebody else. They could use any technique they wanted. They might compete against other baseball players to see whether they could compete better. And as a result of that, they might start learning some statistics. There was a very good example given by Atkinson some time ago. He's the fellow who came up with hypertext and hypertalk for Apple. And he was writing in a book about a friend of his son who was having great trouble with mathematics. And they didn't know what to do. He was not going to do well in school. And then they realized that he had a very great interest in cars. And so they brought him over to a car engineering plant. And they introduced him to someone who began explaining how the car was put together. And within a short period of time, he was interested in exactly how you used the computer for that, what the mathematics were for that. And all of a sudden, he was in the middle of an interest in mathematics, which he had never had before. And what we're not doing is drawing youth into interests that are tied to, or skills that are tied to their interests. And I think without that, you can never truly engage. And what we're doing is we are, to a greater and greater degree, disengaging young people, older people, everybody from a pursuit of a meaningful relationship to the society they live in.
What about the proposition that if people were able to be following their own lights, as it were, in a certain sense, they would be pursuing activities that weren't able to fit into the economic demands of the society? Poets, artists,
right,
actors, people in the expressions of the human
sure.
spirit can
Right.
find no place within the marketplace for those skills. So then do you understand that there's a...
I understand.
And so the idea of freely people acting in their own volition
Yeah.
and on their own basis
Right.
goes counter to the socializing
Right.
role of many of our institutions,
Well,
to teach them to be exactly not that, so that they will fit in to do the kinds of tasks that will be able to be seen to have economic value in the marketplace of goods and services.
I'll answer on a couple of levels on that. First of all, when I was at Bell Labs, a number of artists were invited to come in there. And what they were asked to do was to hook up and become a part of the artistic domain within the laboratories. In other words, to be able to work directly with technologists there. As a matter of fact, it was a collaboration sponsored by EAT, Experiments in Art and Technology. And the purpose, aside from anything else, was to be able to figure out how to move technology further, because the demands of the artists allowed things to move further. I became interested in a new definition of art at that time. My definition of an artist was purely and simply that thing or any person who is doing what they love.
Yes, that's a. I'm glad that we have a good lengthy time here to talk with you. We can talk a full hour on this, because this is a very important subject, and the idea, that's a very important subject. Whether people, the society, people ought, we can say in a philosophical sense, people ought to be able to do what they want. On the other hand, in order to be, the very definition in many people's minds, historically, of responsibility is to not do what you want, because if you do what you want, you'll be eating lollipops and doing things that aren't serving an economic function. And do you think that there's a mismatch between the economic demands or jobs that we have for people to do and the idea that people, the assembly line, the view of who would be 8 hours a day turning bolts on an assembly line, or its counterpart in the information environmental possibility. And those are the things that seem to be able to be given economic reward, whereas people who are, a poet has a very hard time of making his way in this world with his poetry.
Right. No,
you understand?
Yeah, I believe that
or art, or any of
right.
the expressions of the human spirit.
Right.
There's something screwy when they can't make their way with the most creative aspects of the human spirit. You can't make your way with that. You have to do something that is, in a certain sense, deadening of the spirit in order to earn a living.
I believe that what allows people to love what they're doing is always the context within which it is put.
Okay.
For example, people who are involved with organizations for whose cause they are heavily involved. For them, turning a mimeograph machine, Xeroxing the paper, is a meaningful activity if they think that that's leading to something that is tied to the goals they truly believe in.
Yes, truly. Yeah, that would be.
And as a matter of fact, any artist has to do all sorts of things which many people might think this is boring, but for them it is just part of their artistic domain.
Right, and there's
putting out the
discipline to
paper,
anything.
putting everything together, and so on.
And there's discipline to anything.
And what is happening is that we have not put forth interesting contexts in this country since, or at least I wouldn't say necessarily that they're always interesting, but contexts people believe in since the time, as you mentioned, let's say, of a Kennedy. The Second World War was certainly a context that for some reason everyone in this country believed in, so they were galvanized, or many of the people believed in. Now, when you come to a Kennedy, I recall that my sister at that time, because you had mentioned that, he had said something about the importance of exercise, and how
Yes,
everybody
he
should
stressed
take
that. He did, as a matter of
everybody should take a 25-mile walk or something of that nature.
Oh, yeah.
And my sister and her friends got up early one morning, walked to the airport, came back with their feet bloodied.
Yes.
And they were so happy. I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that people could have come back.
Sure, and they had the Peace Corps then, remember? And all
of those
there was
things.
an idealism in the air then at that time.
And what
yeah.
it was tied to was simply the statement of something
Yeah.
within a context people believed in
Yeah.
and people thought was important,
Yeah.
meaningful, etc.
Yeah.
And that's what I think we're missing. I don't think that the problem over here is a question of getting people to like doing things that are not worthwhile or anything else. And even economics can be tied to exhilarated, moved into some sort of exciting domain because one has put it within a context that people can
Would you
believe
see
in.
your Club Ed, it's a great term, isn't it,
Yes.
like Club Med, right?
Right.
The Club Ed, being something that would be voluntary, the People's Association with those activities would be voluntary, part of what Jeremy Rifkin refers to as the emerging service or third wave functions in society. Or would they be profit-making, or would they be market-oriented kinds of things, or what would you say? Do you think that those Club Ed things could be activities where people are freely associating with one another because they're there of their own volition and their own interest? And can we have a society of people who are freely associating and not associating on market principles? Do you think, without going and devolving into some sort of anarchy or something?
Well, I mean, certainly the students would be freely associating. I mean, that's number one.
Right.
How one funds this type of thing, I mean, I think that all sorts of new directions have to be thought about. I mean, you know, a thing like that could be funded either through foundations, could be funded through some very minimal amount of money from district parents and things of this nature. So obviously one doesn't want the thing, you know, any types of ideas that may be worthwhile to collapse because funding isn't there.
Yeah.
But one also doesn't want to be tied to an economic system that, you know, may in fact be counterproductive. So obviously it's, but I don't think the key question
Perhaps you're right.
is how one
That's a
funds or
practical
anything
thing,
of that
yeah.
nature. I think the key question is how one develops things that are exciting enough for people to find worthwhile. I mean, people are talking about latchkey children right now.
Yes, right.
They're talking about the whole concept of people not being able to be exhilarated about the work that's going on in their
Right.
schools. And what I would picture is that if people were doing things that were very exciting
To them.
for them, in a club situation or whatever, if teachers were preparing some of the material, if experts in various forms, and by the way, I never think of education as separate from entertainment.
Okay.
I think that these are tied together.
Okay.
I think that all of these things have to be brought together: technology, education, entertainment, and the whole thing has to be fun. You know,
Fun, right, exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, it is. You know, if somebody is generated, if somebody's really interested in learning, let's just take an example of learning something. Somebody who is really interested in learning it and is pursuing it, that's when you really learn. More, I would submit, I don't know if it's a Neil or Summerhill or Montessori or Progressive or John Dewey notions of education, but the person who is being motivated by themselves, rather than learning by rote what it is you have to learn, although we all had to do some of that in grammar school and so forth, learning irregular verbs and things that we didn't want to do at the moment, again back to that discipline thing. But it's somebody who's really on the quest of something, that's when you're really learning, isn't it? You know, and that curiosity seems to be there in little children, and it seems to diminish somehow, and people have a hard time. Education and the realities of physics, biology, history, all of these things are so incredibly exciting and interesting. It's a shame that people seem to be, in a sense, turned off from pursuing the inherently interesting realities that reality itself is in just education.
Yeah, well, once again, I think there's a potential revolution
in education
about to take place in education just through the technologies. I mean, I had to take many of the courses for any of these disciplines you were talking about, but I did not find them tremendously exciting.
Irregular verbs.
As a matter of fact, what I did find interesting was, in fact, teaching for a while. I mean, that certainly was interesting. But the thing that I found most interesting to teach when I was teaching math, for example, was not the standard math, calculus or anything of that nature, which I found very often rule-based and mechanical. But teaching a course in principles for non-mathematicians, which got to some of the underlying and fundamental aspects. But the thing that made it interesting was that for some reason it was visual. And a lot of it was graphical. And what's happening now with the potential of the computer is that many of the things that until now have been a lecturer standing up by a blackboard and writing one thing after another, suddenly you have the opportunity to become visual. One can begin to see simulations in front of your very eyes, and the whole meaning of what these are about may be transformed for the learner into something where they are participating interactively with the medium, with all of these pieces, where they themselves are turned on by the medium that they're operating.
Well, let's hope so. The medium is the message, Mr. McLuhan used to tell us, and so forth. But you know, that virtual reality and these kind of things that are emerging have tremendous implications as far as education is concerned. I do wonder sometimes how these things are going to interface with our traditional institutions we've inherited, and so forth. That idea, you know, your idea of what you call
Club Ed.
Club Ed, right, is really a good idea. And you've had educational experience teaching at all levels, so that's also interesting because these things apply at all levels, maybe a little differently. You've been interested in other things as well. One of which is we mentioned at the beginning the United Nations and the possibility of there being communications capability on a world scale of television programming and other kinds of programming that might have implications. And I wonder if maybe you might be able to address some of that. I know you have interest in that.
Well, certainly this is something which I think is going to happen no matter who eventually ends
Somebody's
up.
going to do it,
It's happening. It's obviously a new domain, and one of the areas that I've had some interest in is that there is a division, what they call the North-South division.
Yes.
Between developed and developing nations.
Yeah.
And what you have are the sense that the developing nations are there to receive while the developed nations pour their material into them. What I think is going to be the a future direction, which I certainly would like to see, is that each of them begin to study the common problems they have. Over here in the developed nation, we know that there are shootings on the streets, that there is poverty, that there is a whole lot of variables which many of the developing nations may also share. And so one can begin to, through computer networks, through video capabilities, through worldwide communication capabilities, begin to share what the solutions are. And once one is sharing solutions together, one begins to think of oneself as equals. And so there is this hierarchical piece of a developed versus a developing nation begins to disappear as you begin to think of yourselves as intellectual colleagues. And not only intellectual colleagues, but people who are potentially working in the same area. So I think more and more we have to begin to move into a new domain in terms of communications, and that's definitely going to be happening.
And you're going to be doing that. But so far as the United Nations, there's specifically, and you've worked some with the Communication Coordinating Committee.
Right.
And I wonder maybe you could talk a little about that and the possibility of establishing better communication about the United Nations and linking the peoples of the world together, and perhaps some reform to the United Nations. Certainly. Is another question.
Well, these are proposals that we're looking into at this point. There is a group looking into the possibility of a worldwide communication capability. We're hoping to work on such things as computer capabilities and video capabilities and the reporting of news capabilities. But I wouldn't want to go into any great depth about that because some of the people are putting together proposals at this time. And I wouldn't want to, take away from some of the materials. But certainly the objective is to integrate this within some type of comprehensive vision, which will begin to allow for technologies to play a more meaningful role everywhere.
And so it might be something along, without going into, as you say, in details or anything that the people are specific things. We had this phenomena that's really been an important one that Brian Lamb was able to put together, C-SPAN here in the United States. And I really think the sense of civic responsibility and involvement of a great numbers of people would be tremendously diminished if we had minus C-SPAN. It's been a tremendous force for letting the letting the people participate in understanding the government and so forth. Something like that could be done as far as international organization and on an international scale, don't you think? I mean, something like that is bound to start emerging so that internationally there would be something like C-SPAN on an international scale.
Absolutely. Well, it's evident that it's already evolving. I mean, we have the internet beginning. We have various things beginning. And we've got to begin to move in that direction of getting all of that thing to take place.
Mm-hmm. And so, that's something I guess they all sort of fit together in a certain sense, because the communications is coming so quickly, and many of these communications capabilities developed outside of the institutions that have evolved. Do you ever get the sense, and again, from your futurist perspective or from your systems analysis, there's one of the things that's very hard to see. A fish has a very hard time understanding the water in which it swims, or in systems analysis, we have a very hard time seeing the system in which we are a part. There is a term, if I'm not mistaken, you might be more familiar in cybernetics language, or the language where information overload, where when we look at the information that's coming, Vertar Gregorian, is it Vertar Gregorian, who used to be our
public library
head here
yes.
at Brown University now, he wrote at one time and he said the amount of information, just information that's coming, is doubling every 5 years, in an almost exponential curve like that. If you're in a system, you can feel a sense of information overload, but in cybernetics, information overload permits pattern recognition. And one of the unique capabilities of the computer, I think the human mind is far more complex than our most complex computer. It's not hardwired. There's all those neurotransmitters. There's the mind-brain question that we have to deal with, and the ability to recognize patterns between systems is, in a certain sense, unique to the human mental processes, let's say. But the idea of there being information overload permits pattern recognition between systems or subsystems. Again, maybe that's back to your view of there emerging a sense of planetary-wide or Gaia or a systems understanding of the process of which you're a part. You're able to see how things function with, from a higher level perspective. Do you think the technology and the rapid pace of change and systems analysis and these kind of capabilities is giving us ability to be comprehensive rather than specialist in our assessment of well, let's say technological development, sociological development, or psychological development, that being a comprehensive overview is one that we're increasingly able to appropriately have to be one by which we can try and navigate human affairs so that we're not caught within information overload or overloaded situations within systems that if we could see them from a higher level or a level above that, one in which we were caught, that this is one of the promises of the time, systems analysis, or not? I don't know.
Well, I sometimes like to jump up, as you say, and look back at what's going on and try to understand why the things are going on that we claim are so horrendous.
Right, exactly.
One thing that I sometimes look at there is I look at things like our destroying the planet, let's say, or the opening up of the hotspots of the Earth and so on.
But ozone depletion.
Ozone depletion, all of those things. But the question is, why are we doing that? And if one were looking at it from a kind of distant perspective,
yes,
one might say that potentially we're attempting to, or not subconsciously, we're destroying the planet we live on to force us to be able to move out into space. That in fact may be our rendezvous with destiny or something.
You mean
in the sense that
move? You mean physically move, like
well,
a space
now we come to another minor thing, which is, are we the ones that are going to do it? Now, Jastrow, who spoke for some period of time about the fact that we're creating microelectronic circuits and things of this nature that are going to be our successors. So they are our hereditary offspring, so to speak.
A silicon-based system.
Silicon-based that will be able to move out. But there's another form that may be able to move out. It's conceivable that these DNA and other experiments that we're beginning to work with allow us to transform ourselves. Now, right now, there's a tremendous amount of objection to any kind of transformation.
Genetic engineering.
Yeah, a sense that we are the high point or the only point of human evolution, or rather, of evolution.
Understand, yeah.
Yes. But in fact, if one did think that one's destiny was with the universe, then potentially maybe some of the DNA and RNA evolutionary capabilities would allow us to begin to prepare ourselves for some kind of jaunt again in centuries to come. So one doesn't know why all of this is happening. I'm not saying that I am either for or against any of these things. I'm just saying that in watching all of this occur, one can begin to see the possibilities of many alternative directions in terms of where we are heading.
Yeah.
And it may not be that what we're doing, if we're just watching what we are doing, why are we storing more and more weapons of destruction? Why are we setting up a kind of environment that has less and less livability for us, and also overpopulating the planet and all of these other things? It may be that we are, for some subconscious reason, propelling ourselves into some kind of domain that will push us into exploring the rest of the universe.
Either that, or we may entropy. We may, we apparently have, after if the DNA, mitochondrial DNA research is correct, we're all descended of a common ancestor, Homo sapiens sapien. 200,000 years ago, we appear in Africa, and we go through now to where we reach the point where within the lifetime of my son, or near-term lifetime, we've reached a point where we had the destructive capability, the extension of technology is an extension of consciousness into the environment. You can create an environment other than that which is in an Eden-like sense given. And we've reached a point where apparently with weapons of destruction that we have, just the fission and hydronuclear and biological, particularly virological-based systems and so forth, we've apparently reached a point where we are capable of rendering the habitat in a warlike sense, traditional warlike sense, the habitat incapable of the continuation of our species. We couldn't do it in the Second World War as recently as that. That's just 50 years ago. Or even at the Korea time. We didn't have the physical capability or the technological capability. We apparently do now. Joshua Lederberg has said as much, and others have. In the hands of one person, perhaps, could unleash this Promethean capability. The other, and it would seem on the just adverse side, in a systems way or in a comprehensive understanding, the adverse side of that might be able to offer liberating capability of the human spirit that historically we've not felt we've been able to allow for. That, and I use a term I use often. James Joyce had Daedalus say, "History is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken." And we may be awakening from a historical context in which human affairs have evolved, including your war-making, your destructive scenario, and your oppressive social institution, into a liberating capability that is very hard for us to maneuver. And the measure of human purpose is whether we can move anti-entropically across that tendency toward destroying or moving toward chaos, and move and find transformative capability is a measure of human purpose now.
Well, you know, there is
in a system where if we can find sociological, economic, and other kinds of possibilities to allow the unleashing of the human spirit, and that in ecological association with the rest of the biological process in a Gaia-like sense, is the moment of a birth of a new relationship to universe than that which began 200,000 years ago when Homo sapiens sapien appeared. There will be a consciousness transcendent to human consciousness at some moment, unless we do destroy ourselves, the turning point that Fritjof Capra talks about. Or if we were going to the universe, we would probably find other worlds, many, that were not able to transit the discovery of uranium and the unleashing of that potentiality, and just blew off their ozone layers or something. We have the ability to destroy ourselves, and evolution would be picked up by the dolphins or by the cockroaches or by something else, perhaps. But do you understand what I'm saying?
Sure.
The word of time, qualitative transformation. So it might make utopian kinds of thinking possible in a way that the realists have said wasn't possible, and lay us on with historical inherited institutions and a period of qualitative transformation? I don't know.
Well, I was just saying there's a mental gymnasium that we've developed just now, which you mentioned earlier, virtual reality.
Yes.
Now, what that permits is the ability of us to become anything and to be in any environment. As a matter of fact, one of the early virtual reality pieces that I saw was an experiment in which a child entered the land of Alice in Wonderland and went to the Mad Tea Party, Mad Hatter's Tea Party.
Right through the looking glass.
Yeah, and is there, and a rabbit, greets the child and so on. But one could picture that one could create any number of alternative worlds, and not only that, but alternative beings that you are. So you don't have to be any longer of a particular type. You could, you might lose some of your so-called human characteristics in the virtual reality world that you travel in, and you could travel through the universe. You could become part of the entropic, group you were just talking about, or whatever. And so one can begin to...
Anti-entropic, one would hope that...
In any direction. What I'm saying is one can move in any direction once one is within that visual, auditory, totally immersed domain.
But there is, if I may, even as you put a mask on and go into virtual reality with electronic manipulation, Neil Postman says we're amusing ourselves to death with television. I don't know if we can do that with virtual reality. And if we have that mask on our head and we go in and we can go through the looking glass and so forth, but there is also a real world that is going on all the time around us. And if we take our mask off and we walk out on the street and people are in poverty and there's tremendous degradation of the environment and all these other things are taking place because sociologically, governmentally, politically, the real world is allowed to disintegrate to such a point where, do you understand what I'm saying? We have not only the North and the South, if I may, but we have the rich and the poor in terms of information availabilities and so forth. So that what I'm trying to say is I understand what you're saying about the marvelous educational potentialities of that and all of these technological wonders, but there is that real world, and we have leadership, IMF, and other kinds of things. We have problems in the world, as you say, that seem not to be, or do you feel, I wonder, from your perspective, that these are being addressed within the context of our current political, geopolitical, and economic and technological leadership elements within our world society? We have a world society of multinational corporations now. The realities are there. And you feel as though the reality and the navigators of the main institutions of human society, that it's in good hands now, or need there be some sort of alteration to the major institutions by which Spaceship Earth is navigated now?
Well, I've been jumping between different time frames. When I was talking about virtual reality at some time in the future, even the inventor, Jaron Lanier, talks about things in maybe 200, 300 years, although I think it'll be quicker than that than some
No, I
of
think
these
it's good
things
to be able to
happen.
jump out there. That's fine to do it because you get guideposts for the future, and that's good.
No, there's no,
I understand.
Yeah, there's no question that right now, a lot of the institutions we're living with are the institutions of a preceding century or 2 centuries or something.
Or maybe
and so
200,000 years.
But they're not matching the needs and the types of problems that exist on the Earth at this point in time. Oh, no question about that.
Qualitative change is needed at a policy level.
I don't know whether it's qualitative, whether it's quantitative, whether it's whatever. Change is needed, period.
Okay.
And now the question is how one goes about creating some of that change. And, that's an extraordinarily difficult problem, which, at least from the people who I've been seeing at the United Nations, there are a lot of people of good heart and good intentions. And, in fact, I believe that most of the people on the face of the earth are people of good heart and good intentions. And I don't think that we are living in the middle of a total conspiracy.
Oh, no, not at all.
But rather that many people want something better, but because of the tremendous number of different viewpoints, the tremendous number of different ways of looking at things, it becomes very, very difficult to develop a harmonized approach to having these things work in some way. The question that I have is, if one even had the things you were sort of hypothesizing for a moment, let's say you had enough food for everyone.
Oh, yeah.
And you had a good home for everyone. Then what?
Well, then what you would have is if you had the needs of the people met, one would assume, you know, if you had, in a systems way, again, and it seems to me, if I may, you are one who has gone through a great number of the technological interface, the understanding of technology, education, world governmental systems, and many of the important questions that have to be addressed in a very real sense. And I congratulate you on a systems way with your interaction and what you're attempting to do in a comprehensive way. But it would just seem to me, without, I don't know, without, it's like this transiting from a condition of understanding that there is sufficiency rather than scarcity, which has been the context within which human institutions have evolved, would be one major epistemological or ontological understanding, and then a way of making sure that there is sufficient material capability for people to have what it is they need to live in a mass-produced economy. My sense is that Jeremy Rifkin draws attention to the fact we can't distribute only by labor any longer. We need to develop some alternative system of economic distribution other than labor. The automated processes of mass-produced production are going to come into being. I am a binary economist. I think we should spread some ownership of that as a way of distributing income, allowing people then to be, in a certain sense, leisured and sufficient and even affluently leisured, in order then to go to your club ed and to develop what it is they want to do so that they can participate maximally in terms of their own inner given sense of participation in the human experience. And if we get to a point where every human being, it's like a jazz orchestra, you want everyone to play maximally, or a philharmonic orchestra, if you had a liberated humanity, which is a large challenge to consider the oppression that does exist, if you had a liberated humanity like a philharmonic orchestra hitting that moment of peak expression, then there would be, in a synergistic way, a synergistic resonancy of that maximally engaged humanity in touch ecologically with the rest of the biological process of which they are a part, but apexing. There would be a synergistic resonancy synergies of behavior unpredicted by the sum of its parts. It's like leaving the womb that would inter-accommodate us to universe at a level transcendent to where we have been. Where that is, I don't know. But we're at a time of qualitative transformation, and we may be handmaidens or I don't know, what is it, the midwives to a birth of a new way of being, but that we're at a time of qualitative transformation. I don't think we can know for sure what the future holds in that sense. There's a mysterious quality to it, but we're running out of time. I don't know, you asked me a question and I got all involved.
I'm delighted. I think it's a delightful direction that that you were heading towards, and certainly something that would move us towards a tremendous degree of optimism.
Well, we need some new things, and I also want to just say thank you, Jerry, for all that you've done, because as I say, you've been investigating education and television and public access television and other kinds of systems for communicating and education and the exciting intellectual as well as spiritual activity of the human soul is what we want to maximize, even in cable television where you have more time than in broadcast. We run out of time, and I'm sorry we have here.
It's been a real pleasure.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. It's been a pleasure for you in the cable audience, or in the audience, to have the perceptions again. Jerry Spivack, and he's president of Interaction here in New York, and is a person who's been involved in a very sensitive way with the major challenges confronting us here in the United States and on a world scale. Happy to have brought you his perceptions. We invite you to tune in again next time. We'll be coming back next time. Jerry, once again, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Until next time, then, we'll...
These waves are radio waves.